Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the sixth and final episode of Conversion Therapy and You. Tonight, we're looking at the city or the country of Malta, first in Europe to ban so-called conversion therapy in a piece of legislation that was called Affirmation of Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity and Gender Expression Act of 2015. And as usual this evening, I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Laura Haynes. Thank you, Laura, for being with us. Can you bring us up to date in terms of North America? What's going on? And I think you really do need to include Canada this time.
Well, hello, Mike. And yes, we have good news from the US and Canada. In the United States, our Equality Act bill, which would be a conversion therapy bill nationally, is still stuck in the Senate because one senator will not vote for it. In Canada, their bill did not get a final vote for the legislative year, and so it has died. We expect it will be back in the fall, but it has died for now. The IFTCC had a presence at the press conference this week before the vote. Dr. Ann Gillies, who is the Canada country representative, and I, the USA country representative and member of the General Board, both spoke at the press conference. So we're very pleased with these results.
That's excellent. Now, over here, Laura, I think I'm correct in saying it has been reported that they did vote on this, but as I understand it, it was a symbolic vote.
Symbolic vote, a symbolic vote only.
Okay, so it's non-binding.
That's right.
And they leave that detail out here in the UK. I find that very interesting.
Yeah, well, just the detail.
We're really excited about the program this evening, folks. We're going to have two guests, Matthew Grech, who many of you already know, and a well-known politician on the political scene in Malta, Dr. Ivan Grech Mintov. He's going to be coming a little bit later, and we're very much looking forward to that. But now, it's time for us to wake up. Take a look at this.
اسمع لهوا عندي idea ليش نقدر المالتا ونجيبوها جزيرة معروفة اللي تفخر الملك
إيا زgur toġobni l-idea
طلعنا نقفلو ċinturin u ejja ħammorru ġerusalemme it-tieni mħeġġa taliban talla il-mulej ġesu reġa' ġej Jerusalem, il-belt qaddisa, għal-poplu kalla. Faħru, l-aqwa meċej, l-aqwa, Salvaturu feddej, il-feddej, min tal-latije, jendilek naqdi, lilek natura, tijaku mal-qawwa ulet, inti bis, ġustizja, paċi u fer. ħajkun dan l-isem Saqallam birek Min issa l-dejjem Naleku xi pjaċir Inti ħlisni mill-il-sir Int neħi staten U tqajjem moħra Tikxef teżori Ruħi edha tir Inti Alla kbir تعرف كل محبة وياك مستورة دولي أمر بيه ونور النود لوك هاي كنتي طيب نفاحك ليل ونهار نبيس
نفاحك ليل ونهار نفاحك ليل ونهار نفاحك ليل ونهار
I know it's a pity, but that's all the time we have this evening. But if you want to follow that, then go onto YouTube and look for Jerusalema, the Maltese version, or Matthew Grech, and it will come up. But don't do it now. stay with us and let's continue with the program. Matthew, it's lovely to have you. Thank you so much for being here tonight. How's it going for you?
Well, thank you. Keeping up, lots of exciting projects, and it's always my joy and privilege to be part of the movement of men and women who are leaving LGBT and who are promoting biblical sexuality, you know, and we really need to stand our guard and be a difference, because there's a lot of threats coming against our community across the world. So thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. Now, Matthew, you're in the news again. We're going to look a little bit more closely at this. You've had some articles reporting on what you've been doing in terms of speaking to various people. We'll get into that. But could you just give us a flavor of what you actually do in terms of your work in Core Issues Trust and X Out Loud?
Yeah, so we started last year, actually. It was on our hearts to just build an online community of men and women who left LGBT, because we felt the need to come together and strengthen one another in our God-given identities. And so X Out Loud was born. And it's been a wonderful journey. God has really blessed us with a good increase. And we've just been encouraging each other, loving one another, and understanding what contributes to breakthrough and greater level of transformation in our lives. And it's been a real joy. And all of us have been impacted by the love of God in our lives. And it's been our desire to move away from LGBT, because it's just not for us. Our values are more important than feelings that we struggled with in the past, or maybe presently, because it is a journey. We always like to say it's not about gay to straight. It's about lost to saved for us, because we're believers in Jesus. So knowing him transforms our lives, and it's about a journey for us. And we're all on different levels, different paths, but there's something that God does when we come together. We become a strong force in this world. So we're grateful.
That's great. Now, Laura, you had a question for Matthew. I saw your email. You saw that little clip on Jerusalem. Do you want to ask that question? Because I don't think you got an answer.
No. So, well, Matthew, in your Core Issues Trust interviews of people who are coming out of same-sex attraction or behavior, I want to tell you that the joy and the love exudes. It just comes out. And it does not go with the narrative that you must be feeling worthless and ashamed and suicidal. Doesn't go with that. The love and joy, the community, the connection. I don't think you don't look lonely. You look like you're surrounded in a community of love.
Mm-hmm. That's so cute.
I wanted to ask you about the song. You just sang Jerusalem, or I'm not.
Yes, actually, this was an international hit, and it was an idea that came to me spontaneously. I was just literally driving in my car, and I thought, well, Jerusalem, that sounds like it's a spiritual song. And I looked up the lyrics, and I found them to be very spiritual. And yet, this is an international hit that was being played on secular radio stations. So I thought it would make a great Maltese translation, and it was popular in Malta. So if they heard it in the Maltese language and as a Christian song, it would be fantastic. So I worked on it with two friends who also sing and worship in our church. And this was a new project. In fact, the guy we did it with, who was rapping in the song, he never rapped in his entire life, never even thought of doing something that's a rap. But we did it together, and we decided that the lyrics would talk about the second coming of Christ. And it's really God glorifying. And it came out and it went viral in this tiny island. And I think it was shared was it either 2,000 or 3,000 times on Facebook alone. So it got like over 200,000 views on Facebook and another 90,000 views on YouTube. So, and we saw people making videos of it on TikTok, dancing to a Christian song that talks about the second coming of Christ. And it was just such a joy for us to see the name of Jesus being proclaimed across the island. And even TikTok influencers were dancing to it. And I mean, the joy was indescribable. And we felt like it was the start of potentially a real move of God when it comes to Christian music in this land. We look to the US and we're so inspired by the Christian music industry that there is in the US. And we're a small island in the Mediterranean. We desire that there would be such a thing as a Christian music industry, you know. But this brought us hope. Let's put it that way.
That's really encouraging. Thank you so much, Matthew, for being here. We're going to catch up with you later. Folks, it's time now to continue for a few minutes with the series that we have begun in terms of looking at the nature of evidence. And we've tried to do this within the context of archaeology and the discipline of archaeology. For me, it's fascinating to think that there is a window of an opportunity just before the eruption in AD 79, when Vesuvius erupted and spilt all over the Vesuvian towns, Pompeii, Herculaneum, Oplontis, all of these places. But just before that happens, I think, and I get this from the reading that I do, that there was a window of opportunity where possibly Christian believers were able to be open for a brief period in that town. You'll remember we looked at one of the palaces that Poppaea Sabina inhabited. We referred to the fact that Josephus called her a woman of faith, that she'd done a lot of good work in terms of helping Jewish people. But there are some things that have come to light in the city of Pompeii that may indicate that there was indeed a witness from believers, whether they were Jewish or Gentile or a mixture of both, we don't know. But take a look at this. It's part of the puzzle that I hope will begin to unravel as we learn about the nature of evidence, how we use it, the danger of dogma, the role of ideology, and how all of these things can influence our perspective. As far back as 1895, British archaeologist Fitzgerald Marriott commented on at least one of what he considered to be an ancient equilateral street cross. The marks have been discounted as modern survey markers. Most likely, the symbolism of the equilateral street crosses seems linked to Ezekiel chapter 9 and verses 4 to 6, since the word mark mentioned in that verse has been found on several funeral pots in Jerusalem as reclining crosses. But that the street marks were Christian or Jewish crosses is discounted by the eminent archaeologist Heinrich Dinkler, who pronounced as absolute dogma that the symbol of the cross only makes its appearance in the 4th century in the time of Constantine. He would deny that the street crosses and the wall cross that we're about to discuss were religious symbols at all. But dogma, of course, is something that we have to be very careful of. We usually associate Christian activity with symbolism that was made use of during the first Christian century. In particular, the role of the cross is very important in trying to understand how Christians presented themselves to the world. I'm standing in a bakery, and behind me, on the wall, no longer visible, was found in the 1800s a stucco cross, meaning it was built up in the plaster. It's long since disintegrated, but it was well recorded by the archaeologist who discovered it. Yet another evidence that in all probability there were crosses in existence in the 1st century. It's true that the cross came to the foreground in the 4th century AD, But that doesn't mean that it wasn't present and that there weren't places around the world where the cross was evident. We know that before the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, Constantine had a vision in which he was being told that by this sign you will conquer. And so, because he won the Battle of Milvian Bridge, the cross became a symbol of unity for the decaying Roman Empire when Constantine imposed Christianity on the ancient Romans. The legacy that Constantine has left us is the assumption that the cross was nowhere evident in the ancient world before the 4th century AD, before the Battle of Milvian Bridge. The truth is, the archaeological record shows that there are numerous places where early styling of the cross can be identified. So the cross may not have been ubiquitous, it may not have been the preeminent symbol, but it was certainly in use before the 4th century AD, and in all probability in Pompeii. It's important to remember the Flavian emperors, Vespasian, Titus, Domitian, were not disposed to persecuting Christians. So Pompeii becomes an important window to the pre-Constantinian world, the time before the cross became such a preeminent symbol in the society. Within the bakery, there's an interesting juxtaposition between two ancient artifacts. On the wall was an ancient cross, and to my right, in a stairwell, was an ancient mosaic of a serpent or a snake. And one of the issues with ascribing a Christian function to the cross is the fact that it was found in close proximity to a serpent mosaic, a pagan symbol. Both of them, however, could have been apotropaic, both of them concerned to ward off evil spirits. We have to ask ourselves, concerning early Christians, whether they were exclusivist as far away as they were from apostolic leadership, or whether or not there wasn't in fact some syncretism in terms of them finding their way out of pagan culture within the Roman world. This is one of the arguments that is brought against the idea that the cross was in fact a Christian symbol. When it comes to explaining how a Christian cross could have been in such close proximity with a pagan mural on the wall, a symbol revolving around a snake that clearly had pagan connotations, it's probably important to think that people's journeys in spirituality are often different, and clearly in 1st century Christianity would have been very different to the way we think things should have happened. It could have been that individuals were involved in syncretism and had to find their way out of that, or it could have been that a particular leader within the bakery had begun his journey on the Christian path, but had still mixed allegiances in terms of the polytheistic environment in which he was living. We know, for example, that polytheism was certainly the dominant religious ethos of the particular insula that we're standing in at the moment. In the main houses associated with this place have been found images of several different gods. Within the bakery itself, there are several things around the fireplace that we really do need to pay attention to. Right next to the oven was another mosaic of a serpent, and above it was one of those famously termed exuberant phallic symbols, something that is common in Pompeii, but there to indicate goodwill and good fortune. That's why
those symbols were used. Within the bakery also, it's worth mentioning these great millstones that would have turned either by slave power or by mules or donkeys. It's made out of some kind of volcanic stone. The problem is that within the grinding process, there was a certain amount of fragments that came from the stone that seriously damaged the teeth of those who would eat the bread in Pompeii. And on the other side of the bakery, here on the wall, is the remains of a shrine. And in all probability, there would have been a shelf, and on that shelf may well have been the household gods or the gods that were worshipped or revered by people who came to work in the bakery.
Most Roman households and places of work featured a niche or altar designed for private worship called the lararium. Often located in the atrium or near the kitchen hearth, the design of the lararium reminded worshippers of the architecture of public temples in miniature.
The fact is, we don't know the status of belief as far as the workers were concerned. It may well have been that they had ended with their pagan gods and that they had been removed. We simply don't know. The question is, could a Christian cross have been found in the bakery at the same time that these symbols were found? It's accurate to speak of the fact that there was in all probability some kind of Christian worship in this place, when at the same time we know that there were pagan symbols on the walls. Some have argued that it would have been impossible, that Christians at that time would have been exclusivist, and others have said it's probable that there was syncretism, a mixing of ancient and modern religions that were coming together at that time. The fact is, we simply don't know the spiritual status of those who worked here or the manager who rented this property within the Ariana Poliana.
Probably one of the best ways of understanding and also contextualizing finds such as the stucco plaster cross at the bakery shop at the Ariana Poliana is to look at other places where crosses were also believed to have been found. We're now headed back through the Herculaneum Gate en route for the prosperous town of Herculaneum, yet another city destroyed by the Vesuvius eruption in AD 79. So folks, I just want to paint a picture here for a few minutes. This volcano erupts in 79 AD. We know from Acts, the book of Acts, that Paul the Apostle landed just a few kilometers away from Pompeii in AD 60. We know that according to many scholars, some of the writings of the Bible of the New Testament were already in circulation. We know also that Peter disappeared from Jerusalem, and many believed that he went to Rome. And somewhere in the 40s, the Roman Church began. So we have this situation, that this sophisticated Christian community in Rome had already been developed for 20 years by the time Paul lands. Christian literature is being circulated between congregations in the Christian world at the time. So my question is this: could it be that these crosses in the streets that simply sought to protect buildings, whatever we want to think of that, and people's lives, and the cross on the wall, which I know is widely disputed, but also supported by many people as being a genuine Christian symbol. How come we have these things and yet people are saying dogmatically that there were no believers in this part of the world, that Christianity had not got this far? Can you see the issue? Now, we haven't got the answers. We've got lots of questions. We've got some interesting inscriptions. We mentioned the Christianus inscription, the Vivit inscription. We've seen the little inscriptions in the road. We've seen the cross on the wall. We're building a picture here, and I think it's worth examining. And it's important that we recognize that dogma can get in the way, and we have to be very careful in terms of how we use evidence. Food for thought. Folks, let's come back together and continue with what we were talking about. Matthew, help us now, because I'm looking at two articles. One, the title is Matthew Grech tried to convert an undercover British journalist in conversion therapy expose. That's one. And the other one is similarly reporting controversy following report of a person trying to convert a gay man. What are you up to here, Matthew?
Yeah, so it certainly was not my initiative, because the reporter was the one to initiate the conversation and to contact Core Issues Trust. And to be honest, I was a bit busy, but he kept chasing, actually. So we did have a conversation, and of course, he presented himself as Joe Willis, and he put on a very sad, depressed kind of face. And what's the right Christian thing to do? Well, we don't want people to be sad. We want them to reach their goals in life and to have uplifted spirits, don't we? So there we were having a conversation. He expressed that he was very sad about, his same-sex struggles, and he definitely wanted to move away. He claimed to have Christian faith. So he just made up his identity. He made up his purposes. It was all a lie. And it was, of course, voluntary. I mean, for God's sake, he's an undercover reporter, so nothing was coerced. He kept chasing for a conversation, and it happened. And well, it was, I think the day after that, a friend sent me a message. A friend of his sent me a message, apparently. I mean, I don't even know whether she was a friend now. Probably it was all a scene. And she said, oh, he was so encouraged by the conversation. Is it possible to send someone else on a different issue for a conversation and more counseling, because he was very encouraged? So, I mean, the level of deception and the level of, what can I say? It was just all a lie, wasn't it? Because then we found out, and then I think it was a few weeks after that, I'm in a department store and I receive a call from Amy Sharp from the Sunday Mirror. Apparently you did this, apparently you did that. And I was like, whoa, hang on. What are you talking about? Are you telling me that Joe Willis was a British undercover reporter? Say what? And so I was a bit annoyed, because it was just dawning on me, like, nobody likes feeling and being deceived, and I specifically asked for a Zoom meeting because I wanted to see Joe Willis face to face. Maybe I was spending something odd about him, and then, they give us an opportunity to comment on the whole thing. And, you and I, Mike, we discussed it together, and we said, well, yeah, we should comment on it and play our part there. And then I think it was a week or two after that, the Sunday Mirror decided to publish the article and to say that we're practicing conversion therapy. I mean, what a joke! What an absolute joke! And well, to base their opinion on Core Issues Trust on a fake scenario is, I mean, enough said.
It's been done so many times in in the UK, Matthew, and Laura. I don't know if you've had similar experiences in the USA, but it's interesting to me. The article here didn't really go very far at all, even on social media. I think the only person who shared it was the author, but that's another story. I think people are getting a bit tired of this kind of approach. Have you had experiences like this, Laura, with undercover people coming into counseling contexts?
Well, when I have suspected it, I have not gone along with it. So I haven't had something that has gone really beyond someone's
way.
attempting. But I do know it has happened to some of my colleagues. Yes, there have been deceivers.
Yes, and there've even been UK journalists who've gone undercover and gone to the US. There was one case in particular. It all ended up in a book that was then later published. So I don't know, maybe it's a UK thing, folks. What do you think? However, maybe those days are coming to an end. I don't know. Matthew, we want to just listen for a few minutes to your X Factor interview that really created quite a stir. Let's listen to that, folks, and then ask Matthew to talk it through with us a bit.
Hello, jisimni Matthew Grech, għandi 29 sena. Fil-ħajja jiena nagħlem il-kant u l-pjano, nagħmel ukoll music production, għandi l-istudenti tiegħi, nagħmel ukoll administration għall-kumpanija tal-iżviluppar tal-proprjetà. Jiena kien jogħġobni ħafna R&B. U insomma, kont provajt nidħol fix-xena bħala male R&B artist f'Malta. U insomma, mbagħad ġifieri ġejt nominat il-awards shows hawn Malta. U kont qed noħossni encouraged ħafna. U mbagħad tlajt Londra sentejn nofs. Ġrat li xi ħaġa partikolari meta kont Londra għax għamilt turning point kbir f'ħajti. Jiena kont diġà daqsxejn spiritwali, ma kont qed nfittex dik li l-verità f'ħajti. Kelli rivelazzjoni personali ta' minnu Ġesu Kristu u iddeċidejt li nimxi warajh, tajt ħajti kollha lil Ġesu għal ħafna snin issa iffokajt fuq il-fidi tiegħi, warrabt l-ambizzjoni tiegħi, warrabt il-ħolm kollu tiegħi u għadt dan Ġesu tantu reali fil-ħajja tiegħi li worth it li nwarrab kollox biex nsir nafu sew. Jiena kont fil-ħajja omosessuali wara li ovvjament sebt il-fidi tiegħi fi Kristu apprezzajt ħafna id-disinn li ħalaq Alla. Li hu ħalaq iż-żwieġ bejn mara u raġel u dak kollu li huwa barra minn kuntest ta' żwieġ mhijiex irrieda tal-Alla u bekk jaqa' taħt kategorija ta' dnub. Dan ma jfissirx illi raġel u raġel ma jistgħux iħobbu xulxin jew mara u mara ma jistgħux iħobbu xulxin, imma skont tip ta' mħabba. Għax hawn min forsi jifhem il-messaġġ bibliku ħażin dwar is-sesswalità, dwar iż-żwieġ u forsi niġi mistoqsi imma x'jiġifieri li jien naf raġel ma jistgħux iħobbu xulxin jew mara ma jistgħux iħobbu xulxin. L-imħabba mbagħad sesswali hija riservata biss għal raġel u mara li huma miżżewġin fi Kristu. Issa dan il-messaġġ ma jgħodx għal nies li m'għandhomx il-Alla f'ħajjithom, dan il-messaġġ jgħod biss għal dawk li jridu jimxu fis-sewwa tal-Alla u x'hekk. Qiegħed single u kuntent. Imma open biex niżżewweġ mal-mara ta' ħajti.
Matthew, that was really fun to watch. Enjoyed it so much. And I want to discuss a couple of things with you. One is, I gathered that you may have a view that same-sex attraction or same-sex behavior, one or the other, I want to know, is a sin. And this has been a very controversial issue. It's said that if you think one or the other is a sin, and I wonder if you could clarify your view on that for us, that this would cause you to feel that you personally are worthless and shameful and to feel suicidal, that you couldn't possibly be a happy person and have a Christian worldview. So could you clarify for us your thoughts and feelings on that? Is sin a bad, negative word for you, or is it a hopeful word for you?
Thank you, Laura. It's a very good question. And, being in a state of sin, feeling, causes me to feel condemned in my conscience. And so I don't want to feel like I'm sinning before God. I don't want to be sinning because it's not about what I feel. It's about the conviction that I have in my conscience. And so I believe, yes, that same-sex behavior is sinful. And I also believe Well, I make a difference between same-sex attraction and behavior, because God loves the person, but he hates the sin. But I also believe that same-sex attractions are not necessarily God's will. I believe that they're a product of environmental factors in our lives, and that I believe God encourages believers in the transformation of their desires, that they can renew their minds, as the Bible says, and experience transformation. So I don't believe that the best that God has for us is this permanent state of same-sex struggle. I believe that it's something that God wants us to be set free from. And I don't believe that it is an ideal in any way, and that we should accept that as a permanent way of living. So I wouldn't say same-sex attraction is a sin, because that causes unnecessary condemnation. But I do believe that we can be set free from it, and that we can believe God for that. So it brings me joy and hope to know that I can be set free from it. And it makes me feel bad and hopeless if somebody told me, well, this is who you are, that's what you have to accept for the rest of your life, because that doesn't help me to reach my goal of having a family, having a wife, raising children biologically, So it's important for me. The message of transformation and change is absolutely important for my spiritual well-being and also for my mental health.
Do you feel that your sexual feelings are your core self and your core identity? They identify you?
Good question. Actually, I don't believe sexual feelings are essential to my life, and therefore they should not be spoken of in these kind of ontological terms, like this is who I am. And I think that's unnecessary. What I feel does not define who I am, definitely not. So I am who God made me to be. I am a man, and even straight is a label. I don't even support necessarily the heterosexuality kind of state of being. I'm a man, period. And if I'm a man, then God designed me for a woman, and that's what I want to be. And that's the potential that God has given me. So when people are attracted to the opposite sex and we put a label on that and say, okay, you're heterosexual, I think that's the same concept as, well, you're attracted to the opposite sex and you are homosexual. I think it's the same mistake, because feelings never should define who we are. I think this is a time to go back to our biological sex, who God made us to be, and going back to his design and actually talking about it without any shame, because it's a beautiful, perfect design, and there's so much complementarity, right?
So Matthew, what was the impact of that interview? I mean, I think we know, but had you anticipated that you would get the reaction that you did? Just for those who don't know, just cover that part of your story a bit, would you?
Sure. Yes, I was very nervous the day it was going to be aired, because I don't know, maybe I sensed in my spirit that it was going to be something that's important for the media. One of the judges tried to tone down my message, and he said, this God thing, it's good, but try to tone it down, otherwise you're going to lose some people. And so I realized that they're not quite comfortable with the way it's sounding. And actually, I spoke to the producer before it was broadcasted, and I said, how was the editing of my interview? Did they make me sound like I'm a crazy Christian? Like, what did they do with the editing? He said, Matthew, it's fine. We don't think there was anything wrong with your interview. You had every right to say what you said, so we're going to air it. That's what he said. So funnily enough, after my interview, they showed a lesbian couple who got engaged, and they were also participating together at X Factor. So it's this tension of somebody who left homosexuality, and right after there's a lesbian couple that got engaged in one episode of X Factor Malta. So it was all a bit framed, in my opinion. and created. And anyway, there was a lot of backlash. The Minister of Equality in Malta said that my comments should not have been aired. She had a go at the national broadcaster in Malta. Very furious there. I tried to have a dialogue with her, but she said to me, my problem is not with you, my problem is with TVM, the national broadcaster, because they allowed my views to be aired. And of course, X Factor did the right thing. They should have allowed my views to be aired. I have every right to express myself. But what was disappointing is that because of public external pressure, because of the reaction from the public, X Factor made the decision to take down my interview, but also my audition. Wow. So people were not even allowed to affirm me as a singer. So it's just a destruction of my complete identity. It wasn't just my message, it was also my gifts, my talents, who I am. You know, it was the whole package that. So I imagine that they would have thought something like, well, you know, if people like him as a singer, they might like his message. So therefore, let's just take everything out, you know? And that was hard for me because I feel like it was a good audition. And of course, you know, when you're competing, you kind of want approval, I don't know, affirmation, whatever it was. But I had to deal with that. And thankfully, Ivan Grech-Mintoff, as a politician, stood up and supported me. My church supported me a lot, River of Love in Malta. So I'm really grateful. My pastor, Gordon John Manche, and a lot of friends as well came on my side, and Christian Concern, Core Issues Trust, of course, and just having Mike reach out to me was amazing for me. It was just
well, all over the world, folks. If you don't know, this story really came to the foreground, and many people were interested in it. And I think we should say that one of the reasons why this is so important, I guess this was around 2018, Matthew, is that correct? One of the reasons why this is so important is, of course, Malta in 2016 had enacted this act that was about the affirmation of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. So it was all about affirming natural orientation as something, I guess, immutable and unchangeable. And that's why we're here tonight. This is the first nation in Europe that did this. And Matthew's experience was 2 years post that legislation, which I think makes it pretty interesting in terms of life after conversion therapy bans. Laura, I'd love to hear something from you about your reading about this act. Can we get into that a bit? I know we're waiting for Dr. Ivan Grech-Mintoff. I hope he's going to make it. It will be great if he comes. But in the meantime, what have you picked up from reading this document, Laura?
Well, I had some concerns when I read the document. One of the things that I felt it was unclear as to whether a person could have help to decrease acting on their same-sex attraction. I don't know, Matthew, if you have any clarity on that, but from reading the law itself, I could not tell.
Mm-hmm.
And another concern, I mean, that is very important because everyone should have the right to decrease a sexual behavior if it's unlawful, unsafe, an expression of a known medical disorder, threatening or risking their marriage and family. Anybody should, or they just find it unfulfilling. People should be able to decide those things for themselves and get help. It shouldn't be that only heterosexuals can get help. Everyone should be able to get help for those reasons or whatever reason they wish. The government should not be policing thoughts and reasons that somebody wants to have the sexual behavior they want to have. So that's a very important area that I feel was left unclear to me as a reader of the bill. Now, there may be other interpretations we can find out that will help with that. Another concern I had was that it banned therapy. Actually, it banned anyone helping anyone
Yeah.
if the person was vulnerable. And who decides who's vulnerable? Well, a court decides who's vulnerable, not a therapist. I mean, I think therapists are very sensitive to these things. If I'm retired now, but at a time when I was in my practice, if somebody came in wanting same-sex attraction and I saw that they're not ready for it, there are other issues that are more primary for them that need to be dealt with first, I would, of course, do that. Of course. So, therapists are capable of considering who's ready for what kind of therapy. But the court's going to decide this, not the therapist or the therapy bodies. So this really means that therapists in Malta are at risk because anyone could be determined to be vulnerable. I mean, think about it. Most people who come to a therapist for counseling may have a mental disorder or diagnosis, their depression or anxiety or something.
Yep.
So doesn't this mean that all therapists must be terrified of having discussions with someone about their sexuality for fear it might be interpreted as conversion therapy and interpreted as therapy with a vulnerable person? So one of the unfortunate outcomes of putting therapists in this untenable position is they may just shy away from seeing anyone who has diverse sexual or gender experiences, period. I don't think that the politicians thought this through. I don't think it was based on thinking it through. I think it was based on pressure from an ideological agenda. That's what
Matthew, do you have a comment before we go on?
That's very good, and I can hear that's a very expert opinion. Well done, Laura. I think what I noticed from the law itself is that it almost seems to empower informal, unprofessional help to people in this area. It's literally like banning professional and official licensed support and empowering informal, unprofessional support. And not only that, but you know what what the contradiction is as well. So if at the start of the law itself, it says that conversion practices are harmful and they're deceptive. Yet, if somebody voluntarily wants them, they can have them. It's like, it's a contradiction, and it just does not make sense. And the thing is that it says it shall be unlawful for any person to perform conversion practices on a vulnerable person. And therefore, if we're having a conversation with somebody who's not coerced and he voluntarily seeks help away from same-sex attraction because of his values or because of the fact that he wants to save a marriage, or as Laura indicated, then there's nothing wrong with it. The law does not prohibit uncoerced support. As long as it doesn't come from a licensed professional, how does that make any sense? So you mean like you can have an informal conversation, but if it's professional, then that's banned. Like, why are we targeting professionals? I thought they do a better job than unlicensed counselors, so to speak. Do you know what I mean?
But it does talk about any person who does this work, I believe.
Yes.
But Matthew, one thing I notice here in the definition of conversion therapy, the Act says this: provided that any counseling related to the exploration of one's identity with regard to any of the characteristics being affirmed by this Act is excluded from the definition. So in other words, you can explore sexuality with people. Now, in my view, that is exactly what happened when the so-called Joe Willis approached you.
That's right.
He came full of questions. I know in principle you would not simply have begun to launch into trying to change him and therefore putting something on him. You were simply interacting with him and exploring the phenomenon that he was experiencing in his life.
Right. And he actually came with an agenda himself. It was his agenda. It was his purposes. It was his vision, for his life. Yeah, so that's right. And so, the law tells you what conversion practice is, but it also tells you what it is not. And, it says such practices do not include, and you mentioned point 8, Mike, any service or intervention related to the exploration or free development of a person. It also doesn't include healthcare services, certain healthcare services. And that tells me that it's almost saying, well, we're okay with men and women who feel like they're the opposite gender. It's okay for them to make alterations, harmful alterations to their body. That is okay, but not gay to straight or whatever. So
well, that's the great irony of it, isn't it? The whole thing. It's where you sit in terms of conversion therapy. But obviously, for the writers of such acts, the whole transgender thing is the big exclusion. And you can alter people's body, you can cut off genitalia, you can maim people, you can remove their ability to have children. That's not conversion therapy, and that's not harmful. That's the thing that I think is really of concern. Can we talk for a few minutes, please, Laura, about the criminalization of conversion therapy? Because this act talks about, fines of 2,000 euro, up to 10,000, or imprisonment, or both, from between 3 months to 1 year. I mean, this is very similar to Victoria and to Canada, is it not?
Yes. Well, this is what I mean by terrifying therapists to even see someone of various sexual orientations or gender identities, because you never know what someone is going to interpret as conversion therapy. For example, if somebody wants to have gender affirming medical treatments, and you discuss with them the pros and cons from a medical standpoint and from the research standpoint of the pros and cons of the treatment, the side effects and the outcomes, someone might interpret that as you're trying to direct them or tell them what direction to go, and that's conversion therapy, just helping them get informed consent.
Yeah.
Or if you do an evaluation with someone before giving them a letter to go get these things done to their body, and you decide to do a thorough evaluation, which is what the guidelines actually call for, someone might consider the evaluation to be in some way directing them and conversion therapy. Clients have feelings of negative interpretations of their therapists all the time. This is just part of the process. And if we're not threatened, then this can be part of the discussion and actually be useful, because something's happening right in the room. We can discuss it with each other in the relationship and understand what's going on. But you can't take the risk. It's called negative transference. You can't take the risk of dealing with these things if you're going to be punished in these draconian ways. Not safe to take these risks. So the only way to be safe is to just not see somebody of same-sex sexuality or gender incongruence at all. That's the only protection now, and that is the saddest outcome.
And the question that I would like to put to viewers is this not an indication that professionals, I'm afraid, because of these environments that are being created all over the world that are very intimidating, are therefore being more or less forced to abandon people who seek help? They are just being left on their own. This just doesn't make sense to me. Do you think that's accurate, Laura?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. It's very concerning. And I also wonder what this means for pastors, because it does say anyone helping anyone, and whether or not there's a pay even. And I noticed, Matthew, that you said you found your pastor to be very supportive and helpful to you. And his care and support had just, was tremendously important in your life for you. Is he able to give that kind of supporting care now?
So essentially, people like my pastor mainly preach the word of God. They share with the congregation what is already written in the word of God, what is already in the Bible. So we do know that the Bible doesn't necessarily give you a 7-step program of how to be set free from same-sex attraction. So sometimes, it's easy for someone to say, well, homosexuality is a sin. Bang. Okay, I get it, but there's more to it, surely, because I'm struggling with this thing. So can you just, so people of faith need support. It's not enough to just say, well, it's a sin, deal with it. Okay, yeah, but I have a life. And what happens to my future? How do I navigate this thing? Because it's a real thing that I feel in my flesh. And, so there's tremendous need for support for men and women who struggle with same-sex attraction in the church. And the church needs to be equipped. And so if we're going to be scaring pastors and telling them that this is a no-go zone, that is really harmful, because that leaves people of faith with very little information, very few solutions, and it can really have a tremendous impact on their spiritual and mental health and well-being. And it's a real thing. And, where's the compassion?
And Matthew, isn't it the case then that really there's only one direction that is being carved out for such people? They're being forced to remain in their homosexual confusion or their gender confusion, and they are simply going to be affirmed. That's the only pathway out for them. Now, folks, it looks like Ivan is still driving. Apparently, traffic is bad in Malta right now. So we may well have to reschedule him and have him back a little bit later. But we've got the next best thing. Have a look at this clip. I think it's really worth listening to this, and you'll get some insight into his thinking.
I'm Mike Davidson for Voices of the Silenced, and we're here outside the Maltese embassy asking the ambassador for Malta to reconsider the way in which the Maltese government, through Minister Helena Dali, has treated Matthew Grech, an X Factor candidate who has been silenced about his ex-gay testimony. Matthew Grech, thank you so much for being here today in London. As you look back and think about your experience in X Factor, have you any thoughts?
Yes, I definitely celebrate my X Factor Malta experience, and I'm grateful that that my interview was broadcasted and aired despite the controversy. Unfortunately, the multitudes and including the politicians, the government in Malta has expressed quite a lot of hatred towards my story and my life experience. However, the good side of the story is that my church family, River of Love Christian Fellowship, and my pastor, Gordon John, has supported me tremendously, the whole spiritual family. Alianza Bidla, which is a Maltese political party, has been of tremendous help. Dr. Ivan Grech was so supportive. And then United Kingdom, Christian Concern, IFTCC, Core Issues Trust have showed me so much love and hospitality and support in a very practical way. And I feel so welcome here in the UK. I was saved. I gave my life to Jesus in the United Kingdom. So this is a very special place to be. I'm really grateful that I can take a stand and be pro-choice and support individuals who want to move away from homosexual lifestyles. I want the hope of of being able to have a family, lead a family. I think it's wonderful to take this stand today, and I encourage all the churches to rise up and be a voice, because we're meant to make a huge difference. So thank you for having me.
Well, it's so good to have you, and thank you for coming. Andrea Williams, thank you so much for being here today. Why is it important for Christians to stand up in culture today when it comes to ex-gay?
Well, the story of Matthew is the most stunning story of transformation. And that story is going out across Malta. He brings the hope, the healing and the restoration that is found in Jesus Christ. And that's a message that we want to keep on telling. And the most fantastic thing about him and his story and the friends that he has around him and his life is that it's a story that isn't just for him, but a story for all of us, that each one of us can move away from our sin. Now, that's a message of hope. And not to be able to speak that is anti-gospel.
But the church doesn't seem to have very much to say about this issue. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, what I'm loving here is that Matthew's church does. And I want the churches that don't to take a look at Matthew's church, see how they've got behind him, see how they're growing, and see how that movement is growing in Malta. And I am praying that as a result of Matthew and his friends and his church, that we will see news and reformation and revival coming in Malta. We'll see the government change. We'll see a move of God in Malta. I'm waiting for that. And I think it could well be because Matthew and his friends and a church like Matthew's has stood in the gap. And that's what we need to learn to do. We need to have the courage of our convictions. We need to really believe that the gospel is power and that the gospel changes. Just look at Matthew, just look at this story, and let's shout it out.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Privileged to be here. I love it.
I'm here with Ivan Grech-Mintoff, the leader of Alianza Bidla, the opposition party in Malta. Ivan, why are you here today?
First of all, Mike, before I answer that question, it's a huge shame, it's a massive shame for the Maltese government that we came here simply to deliver a letter to the Maltese Commission in London, and it was first of all accepted for us to do so, and then suddenly, because they see us here, they refuse to accept this letter. I'm here because, put simply, if I was to do this speech in Malta instead of in London, I would probably get arrested and accused of promoting gay therapy. This is not the case. Today I am here in London to promote a film, a testimony of a young man who found God in his life and who changed his sexual orientation, a preference, and he decided to express this to the world. In all of the world, this is called freedom of expression, freedom of religion, but not in Malta since 2016. I am very ashamed that the Maltese government has decided to remove people's rights, to use Maltese Parliament to remove people's rights. But even worse, this is happening right now in England. So the British should be very well aware that what happened in Malta a few years back and is now law is also going to happen to them. They should be aware and they should stop this act from happening in England as well. What happened to Matthew Grech and to all the Maltese is now also happening in England. Please be careful, because the Parliament is about to take away basic human rights from the British public. And the British should say no to such an act. Parliament should never be used by anyone to take away human rights.
Thank you for coming, Ivan Grech-Mintoff. For Voices of the Silenced, I'm Mike Davidson.
And apologies again that Dr. Ivan Grech-Mintoff was not able to join us tonight. We'll reschedule him and at some point meet him again. But we're very thankful for his willingness to try to get to us this evening. Laura, in conclusion, what do you think? What does the Malta experience teach us? Anything that stays with you now?
Yes, I see in this this act in Matthew's story. By the way, I saw you in a debate with an activist, and I feel you held your own very well. But watching that, you're having to debate for the right to your values, and seeing what has happened to you, and also seeing this clip on Pompeii, what comes to my mind is a clash of cultural values. And some are Christian, have traditional Christian values. Some have more non-Christian values. Some people are trying to integrate them, from our perspective, trying to integrate them in some ways. The interviewer in that debate said to your opponent, shouldn't there be a right for him to have his values and speak his experience, his life experience? And I think that's the question. I think that's the issue here. Is there room for us?
Well, that's an interesting thing you say, Laura. It's interesting to me that the Maltese High Commission would not receive our letter. The US Embassy would not receive our letter. The German Embassy did receive it, but they received it through a security officer, but we never got a reply. The only people who did receive it was the Spanish Embassy in London, and they did send us a reply. So good on the Spanish for doing that. But to me, that speaks volumes about what is happening here in terms of a complete close down on any dissenting point of view. And I noticed even in an interview that went out this morning on BBC One around conversion therapy, it's the same old thing. We have 3 so-called victims of conversion therapy, but they refused point blank to interview any of our people or to speak to anybody who had a very different experience of interventions that were designed to help them, not to force them into some direction, but to help them to explore the sexual difficulties that they were experiencing. Matthew, thank you so much for what you do, who you are. Happy birthday to you today. I know it's a special day for you. Sorry to blurt that out, but I can't resist. And thank you again for coming. Just stay there a minute.
I'm so inspired by your work. Thank you, Laura and Mike, for keeping us up to date with what's going on in the world in this area. Your commitment is so inspiring to me, and your diligence, really. Well done.
Is there room in the world for Matthew?
That's the question. Laura, we've come to the end now of 6 episodes. We'd hoped to do some of the other nations. I think we have to go back to the drawing board and see where we go from here. But on behalf of Laura and all the guests who've been with us over the last 6 episodes, we want to thank you so much for your attention and for giving us your time as you've viewed these programs. So thank you again and good night.